Hello everyone. In today's tutorial we are going to create an animated turntable inside Unreal and actually kick out our image sequence from Unreal Engine. In order to do that, we're going to need to export our mesh from Maya or 3ds Max, import it into Unreal, create simple materials, a simple lighting solution, and then do our animation inside Unreal. So the first step we need to do is kick this information out so we can bring it into Unreal. So I'll select my geometry. I got the pedestal backdrop in this little dude. Select it. I'll go to File, Export Selection, and I'll hit this check box or settings box next to it. I'm going to do an FBX. This should just work perfectly. You might have to play with some settings in some situations, but for our purposes, this is going to work fine. So I hit Export Selection. I navigate it to my folder on my desktop that I have for my exported objects. So I'll just call this one geo.fbx and export that. Oops, let me know it already exists, so I'm going to override that. Once we have that, I'll minimize this. Let's bring up the Epic Games launcher. So I am going to launch Unreal 4.21. Wait for that to load, and then I'll just create a new blank project. So let's name this one Demo Turntable. Let's create this project, and it's going to load up. And you can see here we have a relatively blank starting position. So by default, it looks like Unreal created some lighting solutions for us, a nice sky sphere, reflection capture sphere, and light source. So I'm going to select everything except for the floor. And this is my world outliner. You can think of this like the outliner in Maya, actually. It's kind of a combination of the outliner and the scene explorer in layer mode. So what I'm going to do is I'll create a new folder. So I'm in this untitled editor. I'll create a new folder, and I'm just going to drop all these kind of preset lighting solution things in this new folder. I'll rename it lighting. And the floor is fine as is. So now if I hide that, you can see all my lighting kind of gets hidden as well. So yeah, that's good. That kind of cleans that up. We'll look back at the outliner when I bring some objects in. Here's our content browser. Now when you're working on a game project, basically your game stores all the assets and blueprints and all that jazz in a directory, just like what you see in your Windows directory, right? If I hit this icon right here, you can see this is my content folder. So everything, all the assets I need for the game are going to be stored here. So let's get that geometry in here. So what I'm going to do first is I'll create, actually, yeah, let's just drag that geo FBX in here. So I'll drag it into this content folder. Depending on how you export your stuff, your scene scale and whatnot, you might need to edit these settings. For us, this will be fine. We're not doing anything too fancy. So I'll hit import all. We get some errors. I'll just close that. And I think a lot of those errors are because I don't have UVs, which we'll get into in 204. So first I just want to show you guys this real quick. Oops. Kind of hid my scene. If we kind of drag this geometry in here, first off, it's super small, so again, scene scale is extremely important when you start getting into bigger projects, when you're bouncing assets back and forth between software packages. So first up, you can see this is like really faceted, right? So we don't have smoothing groups applied, which would help with that faceting. But in all reality, I'm probably just going to smooth these meshes a couple times in Maya and then export it. So again, I just want to reiterate the fact that in Maya, even though I hit 3, that's smooth preview, right? That's only a Maya thing. So I exported it, that didn't translate into Unreal. So I actually need to smooth these objects or play with the smoothing groups to kind of get that smooth look. Now, you playing with smoothing groups won't actually like smooth out the silhouette. You'll still see like a faceted silhouette. But what it will do is messing with the smoothing groups will kind of smooth like this surface. Okay. Let's go back to Maya. I'm just going to select him. Go to Polygon Modeling. This icon right here is your subdivision tool. I'll just give him 1 iteration. I'll give the pedestal 1 iteration, but I'll give this one, the backdrop, 2 iterations. Okay, so now with those kind of smoothed, I will select them again, File, Export Selected, FBX, Export, and just override that OBJ file, or FBX, excuse me. So now, in here, I'll just delete these from my scene. And you can either delete them. I think, let's just delete them. Yep. And drag this over. Re-import them all. Okay. Alright, so before I actually bring these guys into my level, I'm going to kind of organize my content folder, because when you start working with other people and your projects get big, you really want to make sure you're organized so it's easier to find stuff. You don't just want to load everything into this content folder. So it might seem silly for this small of a project, but just know in the future it comes in handy to be organized. So I will right click, new folder, and I will call this one Geo. So this is where my geometry is going to live. And I'll create another new folder. And I actually don't want it nested in the Geo. I want it in the content folder. So I'll move it. And I'll rename this one MAT for mats. So my materials will live here. And if I was bringing in textures to plug into my materials, I'd make another one called textures. So I'll go back up to content. You can see the Geo and Mats folder are here. So I can shift select these, drag them into the geometry folder. I'll move them, select my materials, and move the materials in there. So notice how my naming convention actually came over from Maya. So I have my naming convention for not only my materials, but my objects as well. Okay? So that's kind of handy. So now I'll go to my geometry, select all 3, and I'll just drag them on into my level. So I'm super... So when you start moving assets between different software packages, what you really want to do is make sure you're paying attention to scene scale and the units. For this, I'm not too concerned. I'm just going to scale it up. But just know, when you're working on a bigger project, you're going to want to make sure you understand the unit conversions and how to get things so it just comes in nicely right off the back, and you don't have to keep scaling and trying to match sizes for stuff. So keep that in mind. Do I need to... I feel like my controls are a little bit... Yeah, okay. So this always throws me for a loop because the controls in Unreal are basically like Maya, only your pan, alt middle mouse button, it's kind of inverted. So what I like to do is change that just so I'm not confusing myself. It's make the controls exactly like Maya. So to do that, I'll go to Edit, Editor Preferences, I think it's Viewports, and we want Invert Middle Mouse Pan. We'll select that. Now, yeah, that's a little bit better. I'm not as confused. So if you want your controls to be exactly like Maya, that's how you would do that. I'm sure you can change them to be like 3ds Max, but as long as my controls are Max or Maya, I'm all good. Those are the ones I always bounce between. Okay, so we got this geometry here. I scaled it up. We talked a little about unit conversions for like future projects and stuff. So now what we want to do is make a material, but before that, let's talk a little bit more about Unreal, because we kind of just jumped in here. So if I hit W, E, and R, you can see these are the same shortcuts to get our scale, our move, rotate, and scale tools. Those can also be accessed up here. You have some snapping functions, so you have your translate snapping functions, your angle snapping functions, and your scaling snapping functions. Also, if you're moving in your camera and it seems ridiculously fast, you can come here and adjust your camera speed. So I set it down to 1. So when you import objects and it's super small, you want to take this camera scene down so it's not as quick. So if I bump this up to 7, it's stupid fast. And this is extremely handy. Again, when you're building a video game or stuff, you might have vast levels and you need to get to places really quick. And then once you get to that place, you might need to go into the fine detail and tweak it. So you would change the camera speed. Extremely, extremely important that you guys keep that in mind. What was the default? 3? I think 3 is good for me since I scaled this up. Alright, another thing. This is kind of how we can kind of create things. It's called the modes tab, and in it you have your place, paint, landscape, foliage, and geometry editing tools. We're not going to jump too much into there. We'll come back to it when we set up a spotlight. But just know that's there. We talked about the content browser. When we actually select our objects, you can see this details panel goes into depth about those objects. That's where that is. So you can see I have this guy selected. Here's his static mesh properties, and here's his material. You can see matte metal. Here's the world outliner. This works like Maya's outliner. It's kind of hierarchy structure. So I did put all these lighting things in here, so that's good. Let's go ahead and make one for geometry as well. Create new folder, excuse me, and I'll call this one geom, or just geo. And I will put all my geometry in there. So now all my geometry is nested in here. I know I'm going to want to make a turntable where I turn this and turn this. So to kind of group these together, what I need to do is, I know I like the pivot point for the cylinder. That should be perfectly in the middle. This guy's pivot point, I'm not too certain about. I think it's aligned to the center of the pivot. But what we can do is nest the character inside that pedestal just by dragging him on top of that pedestal. So you can see here I have the body is nested in the pedestal. If I hide this one, only he hides. But when I select it and move it, move tool, both of them move together. When I rotate them, they both rotate together. So that's how you can nest things, kind of grouping things, I guess, in Unreal. So those are nested. That looks good. Let's look at materials. So a couple different ways. If I select our cartoon mesh, you can see here in the details panel, there's that material. So this material is assigned to him. That's why I can access it from here. Or I can go to my mats folder, and there's that material right there. So either way you get to this is up to you. It's kind of easier just to select him. You see that's the material I want to edit. Double click, and you can start editing the material. So when this came in by default, it had like a default color applied to the base color. If you don't see anything here, what you'll need to do is get a node that you can adjust the color for. So if we right click and start typing, I think it's constant 3 vector, this will give you color information. So if you double click this, if you think about last week when we did the Arnold material, we had like this deep metallic red, right? Metallic-like red. So I'll grab this, saturate it, hit OK, plug it into this base color. Okay. So if I want to duplicate this node, you can hit Control W. That duplicates it. And this is actually going to be my roughness node. So in Unreal, black values in the roughness parameter make sharp reflections. White values make blurred reflections. So let's double click this. I'll set it to black, and we don't really need a hue because it's just looking at the value. I'll plug this into the roughness, and you can see how sharp and nice those reflections come out. As soon as I start messing with this value, it starts blurring the reflections. So let's do something like this and hit OK. Okay. So we can see it update in this preview, which is nice, but we need to apply it and save it. So I'll hit apply. It's going to apply that material onto our object, and then I'll save it. So that looks pretty cool. Almost looks like a car paint. Alright, so let's close this out. So now we have to do the same thing for our other two objects, our pedestal and backdrop. The backdrop, I'm just going to double click that. I don't think it's going to be too bad. It's actually not bad as is. Let's just drop all the color out of it though. So let's take the hue out. Hit OK. I think the reflectivity of it is pretty nice. It's not reflective at all really. So that's fine. So I'll apply and save. And let's grab that pedestal material. I am going to want to change this one. Let's give it a darker value. Let's take the hue out and just give it pretty dark value. Hit OK. Control W to duplicate that parameter. Plug it into the roughness. And we can make it pretty reflective. And by pretty reflective, I mean we can have sharper reflections. Oops, and what did I forget to do? Forgot to apply, and I forgot to save. Okay. So yeah, that looks pretty cool. Materials are pretty simple for now. You can definitely get some really nice materials once you start diving into the different material and lighting settings. But for this class, this is good enough. This is just introduction. So yeah, basically our lighting is set up for us, which is nice. Obviously, if you're doing your own scene, you'd want to completely redo the lighting. But I don't want you guys to focus too much on that just yet. But we can, if I zoom out, you can see here's our sun, which is all it is a directional light source. And if I move it, nothing changes because it's a directional light. But what does matter is the rotation, so where this light direction is pointing. So if you can see our little cartoon guy, well, when we render this out, it's really bad composition to have the lighting in front of the model. So let's kind of rotate this so the shadow is actually pointed behind the model. Okay. So we can even rotate the direction this way because we don't want the shadow to be like too extreme. So we'll start rotating it like that. Okay, so we're kind of playing with where that shadow is placed. By default, it's looking at this map for our reflections, so it's reflecting our environment. Skylight kind of adds some, it's either the sky sphere or the skylight that kind of fakes that global illumination. One thing I will say about Unreal is you really have to make sure you're balancing the quality of your lighting, your shadows, your reflections, to get good performance. So at first, it can be tricky to dial in lighting and reflections and whatnot and make them look realistic because those two things, getting soft shadows, nice reflections, especially blurred reflections, it can be taxing on the computer when it's computating in real time. So at first, when you're starting to learn this, that's going to be the trickiest thing, is trying to get decent shadows, decent reflections, decent lighting, and not really sacrifice like the quality of like your frame rates or whatever, draw calls or what have you, to so your game runs smoothly. So just know that those things are pretty intensive to compile in real time. Honestly, it's getting better and better every year, so it's becoming less and less of an issue. But lighting and reflections and shadows are kind of a couple things that aren't. Whereas in like V-Ray and Arnold, for example, we could just drop lights in, right? And we got really nice soft shadows. The materials look really nice. We gotta work a little bit harder in Unreal, but I've seen some really awesome results in Unreal. Okay, so that's the direction light that comes in here. So let's look at if we want to build our own lights. I'll come to this Modes tab, go to Lights, and let's just create a spotlight. I'm not going to go into too much detail for this stuff, but just so you can start playing with it. So I'll go to this spotlight and just drag it into my scene. Ooh, look at all those sparklies. So yeah, we can start getting like a cool rim light if we want to. You can basically use these lights to set up a 3-point lighting solution like we have been. I'm not going to spend the time to do that though. I just want to show you guys where these lights are, so you guys can start experimenting with them yourselves. So if we want kind of like a bit more of a bright light on the front of him, we can kind of position this spotlight. Bam. Okay. So in this light, if I go to the details, you can control things like the color, the intensity, and so on and so forth. Oh, this is another big one. Kind of the spread of that light, how far it comes out. You can affect the cone shape. So these are all settings you can play with. For this light, again, I really like that soft shadow we're getting default from the sun. So what I'm going to do is actually turn off my cast shadows for this light. And there we go. Because my camera's going to be right here somewhere, I'm assuming. Something we can do, I can see this floor in the background, so if I hide it, oh no, it's in the reflection map. So it's still there, unfortunately. That's okay. So yeah, that's really brief introduction into lighting, but that's how you would do that. So again, and then once you come in here, maybe we dial back some of this reflectivity in our model. Apply, save. See what that looks like. So yeah, that looks pretty cool. Okay, so we got the lights. Let's start looking at how we can start creating our turntable. Okay, so I'm going to kind of position the camera a bit how I want it to be. Just center it. Okay, so I am going to come up to the Cinematics tab and click that arrow. I'll add a level sequence. So I'm just going to drop this into our content folder in our directory, and I'll just call this SEQ for sequence, and I'll call this one turntable, or just TT for turntable. Save it, and it brings this up. So this is the sequencer in Unreal. You can see we have our timeline, and now we're going to be able to start animating this guy. Before I animate, I'm going to create a camera. You can create a camera through here, but if you hit this icon, it will create a camera for you, a cinematic camera. So it's a little bit different, but I think it's going to get the job done. So right now you can see it looks blurry. That's because the depth of field on my camera is off. I'm in the camera view. To get out of the camera view and back into like my perspective view, I think I got to click this. So I click this icon right here, and now I'm not in my camera view. You can see it built this camera right here. So if I double click this camera actor, it brings up that camera view right here. So I think that's helpful. And then here's my camera component. So you can start playing with things like the focal length, that aperture. You're going to want to bring that down so it's, or is it up? You want to open up the aperture so it's less blurry. And the reason why it's blurry is because it's creating that depth of field. I don't know if that's strong enough. If we click here, it will just bring us back into our camera. So when you're dialing this in, it might be good to be in this view. So maybe a little bit of depth of field is nice, but you definitely don't want it too much. Okay. So again, I'll just hit this so I'm back into my perspective view and double click. Oops. Hey, come back. There you go. You click the camera in the scene, it looks like. I thought you just double click this. Okay. So we got this nice, it's nicely framed. I did it pretty quick. You can see this is our clip. We can drag it longer. By default, it is 150 frames. So if we wanted like 200 frames, you would just drag this to 200. And that's how long it's going to keep this shot from. And then drag this one out so it actually will render to 300. So we have our camera. Now we have to create our animation. Again, if I select the pedestal group, he should be linked to that, which is what we want. So when we turn the pedestal, he'll turn with it. Right now, we don't have access to him to keyframe him. He needs to be a part of this sequencer. So to do that, if we right click in our sequencer, I have the pedestal selected. So if I right click actor to sequencer, you can just click the top one, add geo pedestal, or you can select it from here. But since I have it selected, I'll just click that. Now it added it to the sequencer. If I expand transform, I have control over the position, rotation, and scale. So I want the rotation. Pitch, roll, pitch, and yaw. That's basically like your X, Y, and Z. Off the top of my head, I don't remember which one is which exactly. But I think what we want to affect is the yaw. In this case, yep, it looks like that's the way we want to spin it. That's the axis we want to spin it about. So what I'll do is frame 0, I will add a keyframe. So if you hit this icon right here, that adds a keyframe. Go all the way to the end, 200. And in the yaw, I'll just enter 360. And so now when I scrub through this, we have a nice, simple animation. If we hit play, we get that ease in and ease out effect. So just like in Max, just like in Maya, we have access to a curve editor. Oops, can we just stop that? So here's the curve editor. If we click this, oh man, where are those keys? I think select the yaw. There we go. So you can see we got this S curve. Going to create that ease in, ease out. If you want a continuous, flat, no ease in, ease out animation, you select those two vertices and set it to linear interpolation. Now when we go play it, it's just a consistent speed with no ease in, ease out. Nothing too new here. It's pretty much the exact same thing that we do in Max and Maya, right? So that's the animation. We got the camera. Now it's time to render it out. So to render it out, we'll actually do that in the sequencer. So if you hit this director's board, and we'll set the output, we still want to kick out JPEGs, and we'll composite them for more compositing control and compression control in After Effects. So we could do EXR PNG. We'll keep it simple for this class. We'll just do JPEGs like we've been doing. We'll set this to, honestly, we can do 1920 by 1080. No problem, because it's going to render super quick. That's one of the advantages of using real-time engines for rendering. They render a lot quicker than V-Ray and Arnold. Compression quality 100. We'll set our directory. So in that folder, that exports folder, I'll just create a new folder and I'll call it Turntable. So if you guys can't see that monitor, that's all I did in that folder where my geo was. I created a turntable one. I will navigate to that. Oops, hit this icon, I guess. Navigate to that, call it turntable. So now that's where it's going to put the frames. I think everything should be good. Right here, this is where we're telling it render from 0 to 200. Every nth frame should be set up correctly. I don't think there's too much more to do. And then we can kick it out. So, yeah. Do I want to talk about? Well, okay. So I guess I'll talk about this real quick, even though I might go over some of your guys' heads. But right here, you can see it says lighting needs to be rebuilt. So oftentimes to save on that computation for like lighting and shadows and stuff, what we'll do a lot of times for static objects is actually bake out the lighting beforehand so it doesn't have to be calculated in real time. If you have a dynamic object, obviously that doesn't really work. So really our object should probably be set to dynamic since it's turning, but I don't want to get too much into that for this class. But we would need to bake the lighting. In addition to that, this guy's not unwrapped, so his light baking might not be too good. But we can let's just render this guy out first, and then we'll look into that. But yeah, so once you set this up, capture movie, should be good. Oh, it's telling us to save our scene. So let's go ahead and do that. And we'll just call this like level 1 or turntable level or something like that. Okay, and it's going to rip through that pretty quick. So in a matter of less than a minute, we're going to have 200 frames. If you guys remember, it was taking us a couple hours, few hours to get 100 frames. So yeah, that actually rendered out pretty nice. I don't think I'm going to bake the lighting because it's going to look bad. So yeah, then we have all these frames. So we would just bring these bad boys into After Effects, composite them. Obviously, there's more we can do. Like, this is a very basic introduction. So we have like kind of this anti-aliasing, some fasting going on that I would want to clean up to really make this pristine. But again, just a quick introduction to kind of get you guys started playing around in Unreal a little bit more. So yeah, this is a good thing. If you guys want to start modeling assets that are going to be in Game Engine, you can use this technique to show what it's going to look like in Engine. Another good software to use is like Marmoset Viewer, or actually I would use Marmoset Viewer. I think you guys can get it for free as students, but maybe not. I think that's Substance for free, not Marmoset. Anyway, hope you guys found this helpful. Again, quick introduction into this stuff, but yeah, always good if you're going to model for games, start getting in the engine earlier rather than later. So I hope you guys like this. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will do my best to help you. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you later.